what you're thinking about, like what's the reason you're creating the game, right? And then, or also like maybe look up like what are the problems people have with this game, right? You'll probably see a lot of Reddit results, and Reddit's actually a great place to ask questions and get people's honest like answers. Like that's actually one of the methods I do to really further understand things and how people feel about certain things. It's a process. I'm not going to lie, but just like finding out, like, and sometimes when you're searching for things on Google, especially if you're phrasing a certain question, what's going to pop up is a drop-down menu and all other inquiries that are popping up. I can't think of it. Answer the Public, I think, is another site, which you could do some like basic keyword research around games and stuff. I've experienced that it's not as helpful in terms of the types of the results that I get, the number of results, I should say, but that takes any and all queries in different forms of questions too, where you can start getting a better sense of what people are actually searching for. And what's really good about this is it shows their intent and everything else. And if they have like intent that's very pain point specific, it gives you even more insight. And what's really cool about doing things this way, and even using Reddit as well to ask these types of questions to see what people feel, you can start picking up on those commonalities. And then it's giving you more ideas, but not just ideas, it's allowing you to get better into the player's head. So, or your ideal player. So that's what we're going to focus at and talking about more. And one last thing I want to say before we go into the next topic is simply, what is your player's core value? Like if you were to boil it down to like three things, and I'm getting this from Richard Branson's teachings, because he's a really good guy about this type of stuff too. If you ever want to follow him, pick up any of his books, great stuff. Core values come down to like three things: health, wealth, and relationships. Well, guess what, guys? We fall all the games, I would say, unless for whatever reason they don't fall into the relationship game. So understanding that what you're doing is you're setting basically the core foundation to establishing a relationship. And it's very applicable too, because what do we talk about here on the show a lot of the times and everything else? Having empathy for people, having a community, and then really catering to that community. So again, being relationship driven and then finding out what their pain points are. If you're addressing a pain point, you are in the process of basically, at least as games are, creating that relationship with them. So I know it's not necessarily a tangible aspect thing, but again, it's having this understanding, because what we're trying to accomplish here in this episode specifically is so you guys can go out there and really understand getting into your ideal player's head. So let's move on. Let's now discuss some other very important information, which is, demographics, interests, and behaviors, and how do we really fully understand those things. So let's just say that, determining, the demographics is another great way to help narrow down your audience. So Mustapha, what are some of the things that you guys have done in terms of identifying what your ideal player base demographics are?
Sure, yeah. I mean, we've discussed a number of things, especially given the nature of the scene that we're kind of going into. Age is a big one. We realized that realistically, we are still selling something for revenue, or at least that's the goal. So adults are typically our target demo, because, we want people who are able to leverage their own income. Then I would say comp titles is typically something that we look at. What are games that are similar to the ones that we make, and who is playing those games? Again, the nature of our pain point kind of dictates that we are also targeting people on the outskirts of the collectible card game genre. So people who might be more casually interested in those types of games. Probably, I would say, more Hearthstone players than Magic players, for instance. People who kind of like the simplicity and burst-like nature of that game, I think would probably translate well to our ideal player base. And then I would say social behaviors. Are these the types of people who would go out and have a game night, or are these the type of people who are going to ragers? Like, these are the types of things that we're kind of identifying the difference between. Because don't get me wrong, like I think our game would do great in a club/bar setting, but I don't know that everyone would agree. So, stuff like that, it kind of helps us to narrow our focus. And it kind of informs how we go about designing cards and mechanics.
Yeah, no, some great points there, and one that you brought up that I wanted to call out on, just because I know some, I feel that some developers will do immediately when they're thinking about, who is in my core audience. It's specifically people who play this game and this game and this game, right? And then and it's not to say again that those aren't bad ways to address things, but it's more of, I think they look at that and then they just stop. Right, so it's like, I'm only going to focus on people who play this type of game. Well, and the reality is, though, like there's more to people than just the games that they play, especially if it's only 3 that are so close to yours. Because chances are that if we're thinking of this ideal player, they didn't just play those 3 games and then called it, and now they're thinking about your game, right? It doesn't work that way. They could very well be like, because I think what happens is they just, some devs will just focus on a specific genre and think that's it. That's my audience. They play this game or whatever. But I mean, how many of you always play? And I'm sure there's maybe a select few, but how many of you just play within one genre, nothing but? I mean, I think that's extremely uncommon. Yes, and plus obviously there's going to be some overlaps with genres and things like that. But basically what I'm saying here is going in with that mindset is going to be very limiting and narrowing, and it doesn't necessarily help you really work or do a good job at finding who your ideal audience. And that's what we're really here talking about, is who is the ideal person. And those people consist up of a lot of different things. So that's the only caveat I want to say to that sometimes, is with some people, they just think in that narrow mindset of, within the genre, these 3 titles, we're good. We're just going to target those games.
So here's what I would say to that as kind of my contribution to that point. Is so for instance, with the example I gave, someone playing Hearthstone probably doesn't even mean that they would like my game. They might just want to keep playing Hearthstone. So like the thing to consider is that, and in my eyes, from my, I guess, writing background, where comp titles are pretty heavily used in publishing, I would say the advantage to them isn't necessarily that people like this game, so they'll like this game. It's that you can investigate why people like the game you're comparing to. So, like, the example I gave was that people enjoy the fast pacing and simplicity of Hearthstone's design.
Yes. Taking
those things, and then rather than in your Steam description saying, our game's like Hearthstone, because it's not, saying something like, our game employs quick, easy to learn mechanics, that are able to be picked up and played in a short-ish time span. Pick up on why people are playing the games that they're playing. And that's the overlap that you really need to be looking for. It's not even necessarily about matching genres, It's about calling out to what people love. And I think we got a lot of that in our conversation with Chevy back in February, I think. Like Eichenfeld is not a game that people love because it's an RPG. It's a game people like because it calls out to the things that people specifically enjoyed about Mega Man Battle Network or Paper Mario, where you're always active while you're moving around in the battles and details like that. So definitely, if you're going to utilize comp titles as an idea, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. You're not just trying to capitalize on the existing audience of a game that's worked hard to earn it. You're trying to get to the bottom of what people like about those things and what you and equally important, what people don't like about those things that you do differently.
Yeah, and I want to. Yeah, I just want to elaborate a little bit further on that too, because I think you're even like just kind of going this direction too. Not just some of the other similarities and stuff, but even some of the thematics or the themes that those games incorporate too. Because think about it, how many times have you seen or whatever, or people talking about within the industry that like, man, there's certain cultures or groups that are definitely underrepresented or poorly represented in video games too. So like anything thematically wise too, and those things could have overlap with not just other games but other things too, such as like TV shows, movies, art. Like now it's just really expanding in terms of other ideas that you can get. Again, bringing it back down to your ideal player base. Because if you just again look at just the simple aspect of a genre or whatever, and not really think outside of the box and where these overlaps are occurring, because I mean, let's face it, everybody, especially now more than ever, is consuming all sorts and different types of media, and now it's a pretty interesting time actually, because there's probably a lot more people are even more interested in and getting excited about. So tapping into those other things and better understanding where those other overlaps occur, again, is all these elements are going to help you narrow down who is your ideal player. And then just to take it one step further, because what we're doing by talking about these demographics, interests, and behaviors is narrowing things down, right? So everything that we talked about so far when we're talking about, comp titles, just basically other interests, and the demographics, and then also what we'll go into in a moment, behaviors, we are just further narrowing it down. And when you write down these sections of what are their interests, what are their demographics, what are their behaviors, just list them out, kind of like some of the examples we provided before. And just to quickly go over behaviors, like what is a typical user behavior, right? Or your player behavior? Do they spend most or if not all their time on Steam? Do they support crowdfunding? Are they actively on social media all the time? Like, what is their behavior? You could go as deep as like, what type of like material do they regularly read? What type of TV shows do they watch? Do they like Marvel? Do they, any number of things? Just start listing those out and find those commonalities. And what can start to happen once you get them down, again, you start getting more into your player's head. What does that ideal player do? Basically, all what we're talking about is creating a buyer persona, right? Or a player persona. That's all what we're doing through the narrowing of everything. And that's the process of how to develop a persona, because, again, this is one of the most difficult processes that everyone's going to face. And if you don't invest the time and energy into doing it, what can happen is you kind of miss the mark. You want to like be in front of certain specific people, but if you don't do all the legwork up front, you might find out that like, oh, for whatever reason, no one's really liking this as much as I thought they would, or you're not getting the feedback you anticipated, or whatever the problem that's coming up. It could be because you didn't clearly define everything from the beginning, and then when you're getting subpar information or feedback or whatever the case may be, it could be because you're just not right in front of the right people. And that is really hard to go back from. I think actually, if I remember, because this has been a while, is like episode 2 with Bill Gardner. He mentioned that being one of the most difficult things was like testing and trying different audiences and then finding out how to like retweak messaging and all these other things to make sure he's getting in front of the right one. And that's going to be an iterating process anyways, but still, that's what we're trying to avoid.
We had a really good section on market study the first time that we had Tanya on the show way back. Yeah. And she was talking about specifically for Boyfriend Dungeon and kind of their testing process around, pinning down the audience for that game. And, in clinical terms, of course, the language is like, doing market research and things like that, but I don't think it's necessarily as intimidating or necessarily has as much of a sort of barrier to entry. Like, you could just go around and start asking people on social media,